My stepsister stole my husband and married him. Years later, I made them both wish they'd never met me, and then I used to think betrayal would come with screaming, slammed doors, maybe a dramatic confession, but when it hit me, it was quiet. So quiet I almost didn't catch it at all. My name's Melanie. I'm from Richmond, and a few years ago, I lost everything I thought was permanent in my life: my marriage, my family, and any illusion that love guarantees loyalty. Derek and I had been together since we were 19. We weren't flashy, we didn't do grand romantic gestures, but we built a life together brick by brick over 10 years, raising 2 kids who meant the world to both of us. Or so I thought. We had our share of hard days like any couple, but we were partners. I stayed home with the kids while he built a steady career at a property firm. We had a modest house, family cookouts on Sundays, and sleepy weeknights filled with cartoons, homework, and bath time routines. Our daughter Sadie was 7 and already smarter than I ever remembered being at that age, while Miles, our 5-year-old, was the kind of kid who hugged you for no reason and then ran off like it never happened. They made life full even when money was tight or when Derek came home looking drained from work. Things only started unraveling after my dad, Martin, remarried. My mother had passed the year before, and I didn't blame him for wanting someone. Grief does strange things to people. Her name was Deborah. She was loud in a way my mother never was, wore too much perfume, and had this smile that never quite reached her eyes. But fine. My dad was lonely, and I wasn't going to make his healing harder. Deborah had a daughter from a previous marriage, Sierra. She was a few years younger than me. Thinner, blonder, more polished, the kind of woman who always looked like she was coming back from brunch. At first, Sierra didn't seem like a threat, just extra. She started showing up at family gatherings, always dressed to kill, with just a little too much interest in Derek. She'd laugh too hard at his jokes and compliment his work ethic like she was interviewing him. I brushed it off as her just being awkward, trying to fit into a blended family. It didn't occur to me that someone who called herself my stepsister could be aiming to blow up my life from the inside. The first red flag should have been at one of Deborah's Sunday dinners when Sierra leaned in and told me, "You're lucky. Derek's the kind of man most women only fantasize about." I remember laughing nervously and brushing it off. "Yeah, he's a good one," I said, thinking she was just being weird. But it didn't stop. She kept finding ways to drop in these compliments that felt like threats dressed in glitter. "Derek's so driven. He deserves someone who really supports that. Some women don't realize what they have until it's gone." It was all subtle, but when you hear enough cracks in the wall, eventually you start noticing the building shifting. One night, I was folding laundry upstairs when I realized I hadn't heard the kids in a while. I went downstairs to check and passed by the living room. The lights were low, and I heard Sierra's voice, soft, deliberate, dripping with something I didn't like. She was sitting way too close to Derek, and she said, "She doesn't understand you like I do. You deserve someone who sees you." And my husband? He didn't shut it down. He didn't get up, didn't tell her to leave. He sat there like he was listening, really listening, and mumbled something I couldn't fully catch about things being complicated. I froze, my arms full of folded towels, heart thudding so loud I was sure they'd hear it from the couch. I stood there behind the wall like a coward, not knowing whether to scream or break something. In the end, I just went back upstairs and stared at the ceiling for hours. The next day, I tried to explain to my dad what I'd heard. I was shaking, not even sure how to say it out loud. And you know what he did? He laughed. "You're always reading into things too much, Mel. Sierra's dramatic, not malicious." Deborah didn't even try to fake sympathy. She just tilted her head and said, "Well, maybe Derek needs someone who pushes him to grow." That's when I realized I wasn't just being ignored. I was being actively dismissed. My own father and his new wife were basically co-signing a plot against my marriage, and I was the only one screaming into a void. Things spiraled fast after that. Derek started staying late at work. He was constantly on his phone. He came home smelling like cologne I didn't wear. And every time I brought up Sierra, he got defensive, angry even. He'd say I was paranoid, that I needed to get a hobby, that I was insecure. Then came the night I will never forget. The kids were asleep, the house quiet. and Derek came in through the front door like a ghost. He sat me down and said, "Mel, I think it's time we go our separate ways." Just like that. No tears, no fight, like he'd been practicing the line in the mirror. I said, "Is this about Sierra?" And he didn't deny it, just stared at the floor and said, "It's not what you think, but things are different now." Different. That word felt like it cracked something in my chest. What the hell did different mean? We had 2 kids, a life, 10 years behind us. Was I suddenly not exciting enough? Was commitment now a burden? He left that night, packed a duffel bag, and walked out like we were just roommates splitting up after a bad lease. Sadie cried for 3 straight nights, asking when Daddy was coming home. Miles kept leaving toy cars on the front step, thinking maybe they'd lure him back. And me? I sat on the bathroom floor with the water running just so the kids wouldn't hear me fall apart. 2 months later, he married her. Sierra, my stepsister. My father and Deborah were at the wedding, smiling like nothing was broken. I wasn't invited, obviously. Instead, I stayed home with my kids and tried to explain to them why Daddy was marrying Aunt Sierra. Try doing that with a straight face. That's when the rage set in. That slow-burning, bone-deep fury that makes you see the world in sharper edges. I realized they didn't just leave me, they erased me, replaced me. My family took a wrecking ball to my life and called it progress. But I wasn't going to be their collateral damage. I had 2 kids who still needed bedtime stories and someone to show up for parent-teacher conferences. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart, so I chose something else. I chose war. Quiet war. The kind where you rise so high, they choke on the air trying to follow. That's where my real story begins. After Derek left and the shock finally wore off, the crushing silence in the house was almost unbearable. Every room whispered memories I wasn't ready to face, and each time I turned a corner, I half expected him to be there. But he was gone, and the weight of everything he'd abandoned was now mine to carry. Sadie kept asking why her dad had stopped calling, and I'd fake a smile while telling her he was just busy. Miles, being 5, didn't understand it all yet, but I could tell he felt something missing in his little world. Bills started piling up on the kitchen counter like they were mocking me for thinking life could ever pause. Derek's child support wasn't just laughable. It was insulting, like a cruel joke played by someone who never planned to stick around. I'd spent nearly 10 years out of the workforce raising our kids, running a household, and supporting his ambitions. But now, with no savings and no job, I was staring down the reality that no one was coming to save us. One night, after feeding the kids dinner on canned soup and toast, I sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning just crying. I had no idea how I was going to make it through another week, let alone build a new life. A friend I hadn't talked to in months, Jessie, reached out after hearing through the grapevine about the divorce. She didn't offer pity, she offered a plan. She was a single mom too, working 2 jobs, going to night classes, and somehow surviving. "Come with me to community college," she said like it was no big deal. "It's not glamorous, but it's a start." I laughed when she said it, not because it was funny, but because it felt so far-fetched. How was I supposed to take classes, get a job, raise 2 kids, and not fall apart? But sitting around feeling sorry for myself wasn't feeding my kids or paying rent, so I enrolled. I chose accounting because at least numbers made sense and didn't lie to your face. The first time I walked into class, I felt like an imposter. Everyone else looked younger, more confident, like they had some roadmap I never received. I hadn't touched a textbook in years, and my brain felt like it was trying to learn underwater. At night, I'd study while folding laundry, and on weekends, I'd juggle shifts at a local diner to cover groceries. Most days, I didn't sleep more than 4 hours, but I kept moving because stopping meant collapsing. Jessie became my lifeline during that first semester. She would meet me in the parking lot with 2 coffees and a tired smile, reminding me every day that we were stronger than the mess behind us. Sometimes, when I felt like giving up, she'd say, "You're building a future they can stand on. Don't you dare quit now." And that hit harder than anything Derek had ever said in 10 years. Meanwhile, Derek would call once every few weeks, asking how we were like he hadn't blown a crater in our lives. He never asked to see the kids, just checked in like he was keeping a guilt log. The last time he called, I finally snapped. He asked how things were, and I said, "Unless you plan on parenting, stop calling." He started saying things were hard for him too, and I actually laughed, because the nerve it took to say that was almost impressive. Hard. Try juggling 2 kids, a job, and night school while scraping together quarters to pay for gas. He didn't have hard, he had inconvenienced. I hung up before he could say another word, and after that, I stopped answering altogether. Weeks blurred into months, and I started getting decent grades. Not perfect, but solid enough to keep going. I picked up part-time work doing books for a mechanic shop thanks to a professor who saw me struggling but never giving up. My nights were spent doing math problems with Sadie at one table while I balanced invoices at another. Miles would fall asleep on the couch most evenings, wrapped in the same Spider-Man blanket Derek bought before everything fell apart. I kept it around, not for nostalgia, but because it still smelled like fabric softener and made Miles feel safe. There were nights when I cried in the shower, biting my fist so the kids wouldn't hear. But in between the exhaustion and stress, something else began to grow. Confidence. I started to feel like I wasn't just surviving, I was rebuilding. I was making choices again, not just reacting to the wreckage Derek left behind. On the day I finished my last class, I didn't even realize it until Jesse texted me. We made it. We didn't have a graduation party or family there clapping for us. It was just a group of tired women eating cold pizza in a break room, laughing like survivors who'd crawled out of a fire. That night, I told Sadie and Miles, "Mom graduated today," and Sadie beamed and said, "Does that mean we get cake?" And I laughed so hard I cried again. But this time, the tears weren't bitter, they were full of pride. I had done it. I hadn't quit. I hadn't let Derek's betrayal define who I would be next. The next morning, while walking them to the bus stop, I realized I was finally standing on my own. My kids were smiling, my bills were paid, and for the first time since that night Derek walked out, I felt like I wasn't waiting for life to start again. I was already living it. We didn't have much, but we had peace. And after all the chaos, that felt like a damn miracle. After I graduated and got that tiny piece of paper that said I mattered again, things started shifting quietly. I didn't expect some grand miracle or overnight transformation, but it felt like stepping into sunlight after years under clouds. I sent out more resumes than I could count, chased leads, filled out applications during lunch breaks, and finally, I got a call back from a small accounting firm in Charlottesville. It wasn't Wall Street, and the office was tucked between a bakery and an insurance agency, but to me, it looked like a skyscraper made of hope. On my first day, I was nervous to the point of nausea. My palms were sweating before I even turned the doorknob, and every possible failure ran through my head like a playlist on loop. What if I forgot everything? What if I couldn't handle it? But then I met Warren, the firm's senior accountant, and he shook my hand like I belonged there. He didn't treat me like a charity case or a woman crawling out of divorce wreckage. He treated me like someone capable. He said, "We've all had to start somewhere, Melanie. Let's get you set up." And it was the first time I felt professional in almost a decade. The work didn't come easy, but it made sense. Balancing ledgers, organizing client reports, sorting through digital chaos. It was methodical and logical, nothing like the emotional carnage I'd spent years surviving. I would get home after work exhausted but proud, and the kids could see the difference in me almost immediately. Sadie stopped asking if we were going to be okay, and Miles started drawing pictures of Mom's office, complete with a tiny desk and stacks of paper. That little hand-drawn sketch lived on our fridge longer than I'd like to admit. Every paycheck, no matter how modest, felt like a battle won. I started budgeting with confidence, not desperation, and for the first time since Derek left, I was sleeping through the night. The kids noticed too. We didn't just get by anymore, we lived. We went to the park on weekends. We baked banana bread on rainy Sundays. I let Sadie choose her own school backpack instead of settling for the cheapest option online. It was like this new version of our life was patching together something whole from all the broken pieces. Then came the call. It was a Thursday night, and I'd just finished helping Sadie with a science project involving too much glitter and not enough supervision. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved, but something told me who it was before I even picked up. Derek. His voice was quieter than I remembered, less cocky, more cautious. "Hey, Mel," he said like nothing had ever happened. I didn't respond. I waited. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I think I made a mistake." That word again. Mistake. As if he'd taken a wrong turn, not detonated our lives for someone else. I kept my voice even. "A mistake?" I asked, not because I needed clarification, but because I wanted to hear how far he'd fall trying to justify it. He started rambling about how things with Sierra weren't what he expected, that he missed the stability, that he hadn't realized what he'd lost. I listened for exactly 2 minutes before cutting in. "You didn't just lose me, Derek. You left me. There's a difference, and we're not walking backwards." He tried to shift the tone, said he didn't expect anything, just wanted to talk, maybe meet up. I could practically smell the desperation through the speaker. He wasn't looking for closure. He was looking for a soft place to land. "I'm not your fallback," I said before hanging up. The next day, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anything. It was like realizing a wound had finally scabbed over. He wasn't a threat anymore. He was just irrelevant. A few weeks later, Warren pulled me aside at work. I braced myself for bad news, heart pounding, but he smiled and said, "We'd like you to take on some higher-tier clients." I blinked, stunned. "We?" I asked, probably too loudly. He chuckled and nodded. "You've earned this." Just like that, I went from part-time assistant to full-time associate with my own accounts to manage. It wasn't just a raise. It was proof that I had value, that my work meant something beyond surviving. That night, I picked up Sadie and Miles from school, took them straight to the grocery store, and let them pick out whatever they wanted for dinner. Of course, Miles chose frozen waffles and Sadie picked boxed mac and cheese, but I didn't care. We lit candles at the table like we were celebrating a national holiday. After dinner, I told them why we were celebrating and what the promotion meant. Sadie asked, "Does that mean you're the boss now?" And I laughed. "Not yet," I said, "but I'm working on it." Life got busy in a different way after that. The kind of busy that feels good, like you're building something instead of just dodging falling debris. The kids were growing fast, turning into their own little people with opinions and jokes and favorite songs. I wasn't checking the mailbox in fear anymore or holding my breath when the phone rang. I had a rhythm, a purpose, and for the first time in years, the weight in my chest wasn't fear, it was drive. Derek started popping up more, texting vague questions about the kids, acting like he was easing back into parenthood. But it was inconsistent, always on his terms, and the kids weren't blind to it anymore. One afternoon, Sadie asked me, "Why does Dad only come around when he feels like it?" And I didn't know how to answer without breaking something inside. I just said, "Because some people take a long time to figure out what matters," and she nodded like she understood more than any 7-year-old should. One night, Miles asked if he could take one of my old calculators to school for show and tell. "It's your power tool," he said, hugging it to his chest. And maybe it was silly, but I cried in the laundry room after they went to bed, because somehow my kids saw strength where I saw scars. We were rebuilding, not perfectly, but honestly. There was no pretending here, just effort, sweat, and a whole lot of stubborn love. That's when I realized I didn't just escape something toxic. I became something solid. I wasn't Derek's ex-wife anymore. I wasn't the woman who got left. I was Melanie. I was a mother, a professional, and someone who dragged herself out of a pit no one thought she'd climb out of. And every single win, no matter how small, was mine to claim. Things had finally settled into something that resembled peace when life, as it tends to do, decided to throw me a curveball soaked in irony. Derek's calls had become less frequent, but when they did come, they always carried this tone of pitiful politeness, like he was rehearsing humility without knowing what it meant. I ignored most of them, let them ring out, deleted his texts without reading, because I had learned that nothing he said ever came without strings attached. And I was finally done being someone's safety net just because they were crashing. Then one Monday evening, right after I picked up the kids from school and we were halfway through making spaghetti, my phone rang again. Same name, same number. But this time I felt something different, a twinge of curiosity. Maybe it was the way Sadie glanced up at me like she already knew who was calling. Or maybe I just wanted to know what disaster he was going to unload this time. I answered, and before I could say anything, he blurted out, "I need help. Not with the kids. Not emotionally. Not anything selfless. Financially." His business had collapsed after a series of bad deals, and from what I gathered through his messy ramble, Sierra had bailed the moment things stopped smelling like luxury. She said she needed someone who could keep up, he mumbled, and I nearly choked on my own breath, trying not to laugh into the phone. The same woman he torched our family for had left him the second his shine faded. I wanted to scream, "What did you expect?" But instead, I stayed quiet and let him unravel. After a long silence, he finally asked, "Would you consider modifying the support order?" I sat there, staring at the wall, thinking of all the nights I had fed the kids cereal while he vacationed in Cancun. I thought of the Christmas he sent a box of discount toys 2 weeks late, while Sadie cried in her room, asking why he didn't come. Every part of me wanted to tell him to drown in the mess he made, but then I looked over at the kids, still laughing, still covered in sauce, and remembered this wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting their peace. So I told him I'd speak with my lawyer. The next day, we sat down together, me and the same lawyer who'd walked me through my divorce while I cried into tissue after tissue. He showed me the numbers. Derek was broke. The man who once bought designer sunglasses like they were snacks now couldn't cover the basics. We could fight him in court, try to squeeze what was left, or we could restructure the support to go straight into a locked trust for the kids. No access for him. No shortcuts. Just guaranteed support for Sadie and Miles. Something he couldn't take back even if he tried. I chose the trust. Not for Derek. Never for Derek. But because my kids deserved stability, no matter how unstable their father chose to be. When I told Derek the plan, he tried to argue. "That's not fair," he said. "It makes me look like a deadbeat." I raised an eyebrow and said, "You don't need help with that. You're doing a great job all on your own." Then I hung up and never answered his calls again. I expected a little fallout, maybe even some backlash, but I didn't expect what came next. A week later, while I was scrolling through social media on a rare quiet evening, Jesse messaged me a link with no explanation. It was a local news article, short, brutal, and almost too good to be true. Derek and Sierra had launched some kind of self-help brand for empowered couples a year back. Coaching seminars, wellness retreats, online courses, the whole over-polished scam package. And now, they were being investigated for financial fraud. Apparently, they had taken money for retreats that never happened, promising transformational healing, and leaving their customers broke and furious. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I started laughing. Not a petty laugh, not even a triumphant one. Just this wild, exhausted laugh that came from the kind of justice the universe rarely delivers. I sent the link to Jesse with a single message: "Karma has Wi-Fi." Over the next few days, more news came out. Sierra had deleted all her accounts. Derek's name was being dragged across every local forum imaginable. Clients were threatening lawsuits, and one woman even posted a tearful video claiming she'd spent her rent money on their program. It was ugly. It was deserved. And through it all, I didn't say a word. I didn't post about it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't send a smug text. I just made pancakes for dinner, tucked my kids into bed, and slept like a woman who no longer cared how low her ex had fallen. One night, Sadie came to me with her tablet and said, "Mom, isn't this Dad?" It was a photo from one of the news articles. I took the tablet from her hands and said gently, "It is, but that's not our business anymore." She looked at me for a long second, then just nodded. Okay. That one word hit me harder than any headline ever could, because we were done, and we were okay. I kept working. I kept showing up. I kept proving that rebuilding doesn't always need applause. It just needs consistency. One afternoon, Warren called me into his office again. By now I didn't panic at those calls, just walked in ready. He offered me another promotion, bigger clients, higher salary, more control. I didn't cry. I didn't doubt myself. I shook his hand and said, "Thank you for believing in me." On the way home, I picked up ice cream, because Sadie and Miles had come to expect that every time something good happened. "Is this because you're more bossy now?" Miles asked, and I smiled. "Exactly," I said. A few nights later, I caught myself just standing in the kitchen, watching them. Sadie was doing math homework without needing help. Miles was humming some silly tune while building Lego towers. It was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next shoe to drop. I wasn't holding my breath, afraid everything would collapse again. We were standing on solid ground, and I had built it with my own 2 hands. Derek and Sierra were still out there somewhere, probably drowning in lawsuits and unpaid bills, but that wasn't my story anymore. My story was 2 beautiful kids who were thriving, a career I fought tooth and nail to build, and a home filled with love that didn't come with conditions or apologies. And if I ever doubted what I'd been through or how far I'd come, all I had to do was look at my life now, quiet, full, real, and know the truth. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need their downfall. I had something better. I thought I'd reached the finish line, that quiet place after the storm where everything is finally just still. But life, as always, wasn't finished with me yet, not in a tragic way this time, but in a way that made me see how far I'd really come. Things were solid. My job had turned into a real career. The trust fund for Sadie and Miles was growing steadily. The house was no longer a place of ghosts, but of laughter and weekend art projects. I had carved out peace where there used to be panic, and every day, without Derek's shadow, felt lighter. Then one Saturday morning, I got a call from my lawyer. Nothing urgent, just a courtesy heads up. Apparently, Derek had filed to reduce his support payments again, this time citing complete financial collapse and unemployability. I sat there on the porch, sun on my face, coffee in hand, listening to this nonsense with a straight face. There was a time when something like this would have sent me spiraling into anxiety and fear, but now it was just noise. Background noise from someone who still hadn't figured out that choices have consequences. I met with my lawyer the following week. We went over everything in calm, measured steps like we were planning a renovation, not dissecting a man's downfall. Legally, we had options, but ethically I already knew what I wanted to do. We weren't going to fight over scraps or waste energy on court drama. Instead, we drafted an amendment that froze his remaining obligations directly into the trust fund. That way, even if he disappeared, my kids wouldn't be left waiting for promises that never showed up. It wasn't about punishing Derek anymore. It was about protecting Sadie and Miles from being let down again. When I got home that evening, I sat them both down at the kitchen table, keeping it simple but honest. "Your dad's having a hard time," I said, watching Sadie's face carefully. "But I made sure that you two will always be taken care of." Miles just nodded and kept coloring in the lines of his picture, completely unbothered. Sadie looked at me, thoughtful and quiet, then asked, "Does this mean he won't visit anymore?" I didn't have a real answer, so I gave her the only truth I could. Sometimes people disappear not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to show up. She nodded again and didn't ask anything else. That was the moment I realized my kids had already adjusted to his absence far better than I expected. They weren't waiting on him anymore. They were watching me, and as long as I kept showing up, they would be okay. A few days later, during one of our Saturday pancake mornings, Sadie scored her first goal in a soccer match. She came running off the field, covered in dirt, smile beaming, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not just pride, but a deep, anchored sense of joy. Miles jumped up and down, yelling that his sister was faster than a jet, and I laughed so hard I almost fell off the bleachers. We celebrated with milkshakes and greasy fries, singing along to terrible pop songs in the car. No drama, no sadness, just us, exactly how we were supposed to be. That night, as I tucked them into bed, Sadie reached up and hugged me extra tight. "You always make everything feel okay," she whispered. I kissed her forehead and whispered back, "That's my job, sweetheart. Always." I thought the story was over until it wasn't. A few months later, while scrolling social media after work, I saw a post that made my stomach drop, but not for the reason I expected. It was a photo of Sierra, dressed up, heavily filtered, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. And on her left hand, a brand new engagement ring. I blinked, checked the caption, and there it was. "True love always finds you when you've healed." I nearly dropped my phone. Had it been a year yet since she and Derek imploded? Maybe. Maybe not. Either way, she'd moved on faster than a summer storm. I didn't even bother sending it to anyone. Not to Jessie, not to my sister, not even to my lawyer for a laugh. Because, honestly, it didn't matter anymore. Let her parade around in a new fairy tale. Let her post cryptic quotes about strength and healing. I had real strength, the kind that didn't need validation or curated hashtags. I had lived through hell, rebuilt my life from splinters, and created a home my kids could thrive in. That beat whatever ring she was flaunting online, no contest. The final surprise came quietly. One afternoon, I got a knock at the door. It was Martin, my dad, looking older than I remembered, hat in his hands like he'd been standing out there rehearsing what to say. I let him in, poured him coffee, waited for whatever speech he had prepared. But he didn't give one. He just sat at the table and finally said, "I was wrong. About all of it." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence settle between us like dust. He looked me in the eye, something he hadn't done since Derek left, and added, "You didn't deserve what happened. None of it." That was it. No dramatic apology. No justification. Just quiet acknowledgement. And somehow, that felt like enough. I nodded once, told him he could come by more if he wanted. Sadie and Miles would like that. He smiled, wiped his eyes, and we sat there in peace for the first time in years. That night, I stood on the porch watching the sun drop behind the trees, arms crossed, heart full, and thought, this is it. This is what healing looks like. Not flashy, not loud, just stable, real, earned. A few weeks later, on an ordinary Thursday, Jessie and I took the kids to a nearby lake for the day. We brought sandwiches, towels, buckets for rocks, and watched them play like the world had never been anything but kind. I snapped a photo of Sadie holding Miles' hand as they climbed over driftwood and saved it to my favorites. Because in that tiny, perfect moment, I saw everything I had fought for and won. No court papers, no apologies, no revenge plots, just freedom, just love, just us.